Okay, so this should be recording. Blood supply to the brain. When I think about the blood supply to the brain, I always like to start with the heart. Okay, coming off of the heart, there is a major blood vessel. This one right here. Does anybody remember what this one's called? Yeah, that's the aorta. Okay, and if that's the aorta, then that means that this is the left side over here. Okay, aorta's on the left side, and then this is the right side. Okay, that's where we're starting. Coming off the left side of the aorta, on the far outside portion, there is a blood vessel here. Does anybody remember what that one's called? What's this blood vessel right here? Oh yeah, subclavian, good. Left subclavian. So this is your left subclavian. Great. Okay. Now, next to the left subclavian, there's another blood vessel. Still supplies the left side. What's that one? That's the common carotid. Great. So that's the left common carotid. Okay, moving over to the right side. It's a little bit different. There's one major vessel that comes off here and then splits into two. What's the one major vessel coming off on the right side of the aorta? Brachiocephalic trunk. Brachiocephalic trunk. Okay. So far, so good. Now, the brachiocephalic trunk on the more outside portion here splits into another artery. Does anybody remember the name of that one? This is the right subclavian. So S-U-B-C-L-A-V-I-A-N. Okay, right subclavian. Okay, and next to the right subclavian, more medial. What's that one? This one right here. Yeah, that's your right common carotid. Okay, coming off the heart, major blood vessel is the aorta. On the left side, you have your left subclavian, or on the outside, and you also have your left common carotid. On the right side, you have your brachiocephalic trunk, which splits into the right common carotid and the right subclavian. All right, now moving on, I am going to choose, it doesn't matter to me what colors you use, but I'm going to choose to label the posterior blood supply to the brain a different color than the anterior blood supply to the brain. Okay, thinking about the posterior blood supply to the brain, does anyone know, it's going to happen on both the right and left sides, what major artery of these two, starting on the left side, is going to supply the posterior part of the brain with blood? Does anybody know? Is it subclavian or carotid? Nobody knows. Don't remember. Okay, subclavian. Okay, your subclavian is going to put off a main branch. Okay, and this main branch comes up off the subclavian. Okay, this is known as your left vertebral artery. So we're going to call the posterior circulation the vertebro-basilar system. So this is the left vertebral. Okay, the left vertebral artery. And the same thing happens on the right side, coming off the right subclavian, going straight up, supply posterior portion of the brain with blood, is going to be your right vertebral. right vertebral artery. Okay, left and right subclavian branches off into the left and right vertebral. And then you have your common carotid. Your common carotid splits into two different arteries. I think that's split here. Does anybody remember what the common carotid splits into? Yeah, internal and external. Okay, so this is your internal carotid, and then this is your external carotid. Okay, and again, these are left internal and left external. Is it the internal or external carotid that supplies the anterior part of the brain with blood? Does anybody remember? Internal, good, awesome. And again, this is external carotid and then internal carotid. So the internal carotid is just going to come straight up. Same thing happens on the right side. Okay, you have split into common carotid, into internal carotid, and external carotid. I'm going to use a fine, I lost my fine tip grid, so I'm going to use more and label that so it's a little bit more clear. So this is going to be your right internal carotid. Okay, and then this is your right external. Like I said, it's going to be the internal carotid that's going to come up and supply the anterior portion of your brain with blood. Edie, did you have a question?
No, I'm just trying to read it.
Sorry about that. I lost my fine tip. So this should say internal carotid, and that should say external carotid.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm going to have to get another red fine tip. Okay, so going back to the vertebral artery system, the left vertebral artery ascends upward, okay, on both the right and the left sides. Okay, and then it comes to join together at about the level where the pons and the medulla meet. So where that point is. We'll look at that a little bit more closely. But that's called the pontomedullary junction. So left and right vertebral ascend upward toward the brain, and then about the level of the pontomedullary junction, which is here, they come together to form one artery. It's going to be the main artery that supplies a lot to the posterior portion of the brain. Does anybody remember what the name of that artery is? It's your basilar. B-A-S-I-L-A-R. Basilar artery. And we're going to look at that in more detail close up here in a minute.
Can you spell that one more time?
Yep. B-A-S-I-L-A-R. Basilar. B-A-S-I-L-A-R. That's your basilar artery. So coming off the aorta, on the left side, subclavian, left subclavian, on the right side, brachiocephalic trunk splits into subclavian, and then off the subclavian, the left and right vertebral arteries rise up toward the brain, and then they come together at about the level of the pontomedullary junction to form one main artery, and that main artery is the basilar artery. That's why the posterior portion of the brain is supplied by blood, something called the vertebro-basilar system. Okay, those are the two main arteries that are involved in supplying that area with blood. Make sense? And then thinking about what happens with the internal carotid comes off the left and right common carotid arteries and just continues to rise up to supply the anterior portion of the brain with blood. Okay, this comes all the way up. So you have two arteries coming up on the left and right side for the anterior circulatory system, but just one basilar. Vertebral comes up, makes basilar, goes all the way up. And this is everything starting at the level of the heart. Okay, a little bit of a review. I think Dr. Blair may have talked a little bit about this, but it's going to be really important when we think about patient presentations in this course.
The green is the anterior or posterior?
Posterior. The green is the posterior. And I'm going to keep that consistent for the rest of the day. You'll see that. And the red is the anterior, and I'll keep that consistent too, because we're going to put things together as we go through. Other questions? So I think I'm going to write in red and maroon instead of red, because I think that's a little hard to read with the chunky tip.
What did you say the junction of the vertebral arteries was again?
It's at the level of something called the ponto, P-O-N-T-O, medullary, M-E-D-U-L-L-A-R-Y, junction. And that means nothing more than the level of where the pons and the medulla meet. And we'll look at that on the next picture. Okay, so it's going to be repetition. But good, ask me questions. If something isn't clear, please let me know. Does that make sense? See what's happening at the level of the heart? Yeah, Derek?
So are all these, like, every single one of these major arteries that supply to the CNS, or just specific ones that we need to focus on?
I'm sorry. I don't know that I fully understood your question. You said, are these the major arteries that supply blood to the CNS?
Yeah.
These are the arteries that supply blood. There is nothing else. That's it. So your left and right vertebral, on basilar, and then your internal right and left side. That's it. That's what takes up the blood in your brain. Any other questions? Yeah, this is all we have to know for putting things together. Okay, if there aren't any other questions, let's move on to this one. And like I said, this is the blood supply to the posterior portion of the brain, vertebro-basilar. And one thing you will definitely find out in this course, and maybe others too, I don't know, is that my spelling is not the best. This should be an E. Apologies. Vertebro-basilar circulation. And it's called the vertebro-basilar circulation because there are two main arteries supplying the posterior part of the brain with blood, and those are the vertebral artery and the basilar artery. But we're going to look at them in a little bit more detail in this picture. Okay, let's start labeling parts. If this is kind of a close-up view of the brain stem. I think it kind of looks like an alien. I think it looks like an alien because of these eyes right here, but you'll get used to my drawings. If you're looking at the way that you're looking at me right now is how you're looking at this picture. Okay, so looking at me straight on. So in other words, this is the back of my head, way back. This disc-like thing is way in the back, and the brainstem is positioned in front. Okay. Having said that, and the cortical region's up here. I've just removed the cortical region. But this is that part of the brain that's responsible for balance and coordination. Does anybody remember what the name of that was? That's your cerebellum. Good. All right. Starting way down here, this portion, what would that be? This portion right here. Yeah, that's your spinal cord. Moving on up the chain. These are the three parts of the brainstem, but they're blown up. So the lowermost part of the brainstem, does anybody remember? Good, medulla. Okay, and then where the medulla and the pons meet, there's the pontomedullary junction. So this is the pons. Okay, and then the uppermost portion of the brainstem, what's that called? Midbrain, awesome. Okay, in the midbrain, really important landmark when it comes to the vertebral basilar system. And when we pull the brains, you can actually see this. It's kind of cool to follow the blood supply up the brainstem. There's a cranial nerve here in the midbrain. Does anybody know what a cranial nerve that is? It sits out, it's the one in the midbrain that comes out the front. Sorry, I heard it. 3. It's cranial nerve number 3. Okay, this is cranial nerve 3. Okay, cranial nerve 3. The name is the oculomotor nerve, and we'll get to that when we get more. But for now, you should know that it's cranial nerve 3. That's a main landmark. Like I said, when we pull the brains, you'll be able to see the circulatory system come up. Cranial nerve number 3 is sticking out, and then things happen. So you can identify it pretty quickly. Pretty big one. Okay, so we'll see where we are? All right, now, thinking about the posterior circulatory system, whatever color you use for the vertebral artery, try and keep that consistent, okay? And what happens is, so, again, this is the left, yeah. This is the left side, this is the left side here, and then this is the right side. Okay, try and keep that clear. Coming up, we had some arteries here that came off the right and left subclavian. So remember the name of the artery that came off the subclavian? What's this one? What would this artery be coming off the left side? Yeah, this is your left vertebral, B-E-R-T-E. There's your left vertebral artery coming up, continuing on from the heart. And then coming up here on the right side, we have your right vertebral. So just a continuation of what we just looked at. Okay, and then off the left and right vertebral arteries, they come together at about the level of the pontomedullary junction, which is this point right here. It's the point where the pons and the medulla meet. Okay, so left and right vertebral come up at about the level of the pontomedullary junction. They form one main artery, and that main artery goes straight on up to just above the level of the third cranial nerve. Just above. What was the name of that artery that comes off the left and right vertebral? This is your basilar. There's only one, right? B-A-S-I-L-A-R. It's your basilar artery. That's why it's a good portion of the pons in the middle of blood, right? Okay, and then just above the level of the third cranial nerve, basilar artery rises all the way up there, and then the basilar splits into 2 different shoots, 2 different branches. One branch on this left side here comes out and then goes backward, okay? And then there's going to be another one to match it on the right side that comes out and goes backward. And this is going to supply the occipital lobe. The occipital lobe is the one way in the back. This is the artery. These arteries, 2 of them, are going to supply the occipital lobe with blood. Does anybody know the name of the artery that supplies the occipital lobe? That's going to be your PCA. It's called your posterior. This is the left posterior cerebral artery. And we'll abbreviate it PCA for short. Okay, so there's going to be your left PCA, and then there's also going to be your right PCA on the other side. And again, the function of the PCA is, majority of the function is to simply supply the occipital lobe with blood. So given that you learned a little bit about the occipital lobe before. If somebody had a problem with their PCA, what kind of symptoms do you think the patient might have? Yeah, vision changes, absolutely. It's that simple. So you know where the artery's going, you know what that lobe does, so you can put two and two together right away. Okay? So left and right vertebral come up, comes in the middle, form one artery at about the level of the pontomedullary junction called the basilar. Basilar comes up just above the third cranial nerve and then splits into two chutes, left chute and right chute. These are the PCAs, posterior cerebral, so it's supplying the cerebral cortex with blood. Okay? Got it? Questions? All right, moving on. This is a little bit of an offshoot. There are two major arteries that come off of the left and right vertebral that we have to worry about. The first one I'm going to have come off here at about this level, and I'm going to make it blue. So there's this, and then it's going to come off of this side. Like I said, it comes off the left and the right vertebral. And then it comes straight down to form one artery, and that artery supplies the anterior 2/3 of the spinal cord with blood. Does everybody know the name of that one? It supplies the anterior 2/3. So it's the anterior, it's known as the ASA, or simply the anterior spinal artery, ASA. Anterior. So the first major artery formed that we're going to worry about from the left and right vertebral is the ASA. Left and right vertebral both contribute to form one major artery, the anterior spinal artery, and the anterior spinal artery is responsible for supplying the anterior 2/3 of the spinal cord with blood. That'll be important when we get to the spinal cord section of the course. Okay. And then the next one is going to be coming off, again, the vertebral artery on the other side. It's going to come off the left and right vertebral, and it's going to be responsible for supplying blood to the posterior inferior surface of the cerebellum. And again, second, coming off the vertebral arteries on the left and right side, there are going to be two major blood vessels that come off, and these blood vessels are responsible for supplying blood to the posterior inferior surface of the cerebellum. Okay, does everybody know the name of this? Heard of PICA? It's abbreviated PICA. It's the posterior inferior cerebellar artery. So on the left side, there's a left pica, and that's posterior inferior cerebellar, because it's supplying blood to the cerebellum artery. It's abbreviated PICA. There's one on the right side too. So there's a left and right pica. So the first major artery coming off the vertebral arteries are the ASA, is the ASA artery. Supplies the anterior 2/3 of the spinal cord with blood. Second artery that's important to know that comes off the vertebral arteries is PICA, the posterior inferior cerebellar artery. So named because it supplies the posterior inferior surface of the cerebellum with blood. Okay, pretty straightforward. Questions? Somebody had a problem with their pica. What kind of symptoms might you expect in that patient? Balance problems, coordination problems. Absolutely. You got it. Now, moving upward just a little bit. Let's look at the next artery that we have to worry about. Comes off the basilar. Okay, so this is the first one that we've seen come off of the basilar artery. Oh, aside from the PCA. But coming off the basilar, this one is, I think of that as pica's sister. it supplies the anterior inferior surface of the cerebellum with blood. So given that it supplies the anterior inferior surface of the cerebellum with blood, what do you think it would be called? Any guesses? ICA. ICA, A-I-C-A. It's ICA's sister, ICA. So this is left ICA, A-I-C-A. So it's anterior inferior cerebellar artery. Okay, so your anterior inferior cerebellar artery. There's one on the left side, and then there's one on the right side. Okay, and ICA's the first one that we've seen come off the basilar. Both pica and ASA come off vertebral.
I have a question.
Yes. Yeah.
Why is that one a light green color and the other one's blue for anterior? Or is
Different
that-
arteries. I'm just trying to come up. So I'm trying to keep consistent with the green for the vertebral basilar circulation, but the ASA is blue only because it's supplying the spinal cord.
Okay.
So it's coming off of that system, but it's supplying a little bit different. Okay, any other questions? Okay, now, there's one more that comes off the basilar that we have to worry about. And the next one is going to be coming off the basilar artery, just below the level of the third cranial nerve. It's going to be an artery that comes and goes in this direction, and it's going to be responsible for supplying the superior surface of the cerebellum with blood. That's good. Okay, that artery supplies the superior surface of the cerebellum with blood. Any guesses as to the name? Yep, superior cerebellar artery. Good. So this is going to be the left SCA, and that stands for superior cerebellar artery. Okay, so there's a left SCA, and then there's going to be a right SCA. Okay, superior cerebellar artery. So coming off the vertebral artery, you have your ASA, supplies spinal cord blood. You also have your pica, left and right pica, supplies the posterior inferior surface of the cerebellum with blood. Moving on up, coming off of the basilar, first artery is ICA. You have left and right ICA. ICA stands for anterior inferior cerebellar artery, which supplies the anterior inferior surface of the cerebellum with blood. Moving up, basilar has another chute that you need to know. It's called the superior cerebellar artery. Superior cerebellar artery comes off the basilar artery just below the level of the third cranial nerve. And we also talked about the fact that basilar comes up and splits itself into two main arteries. Posterior cerebral artery supplies the cerebral cortex with blood. One more. Coming off the basilar artery, there are just small little arteries here that we have to think about. And kind of the basilar supplies most of the medial section of the pons with blood. Well, these are teeny tiny little chutes coming off the basilar to supply a good portion of the pons with blood. And since it does that, that's its function, these are called pontine arteries, Pontine. So those are your pontine arteries. And they're just little teeny tiny little chutes. They're not major blood vessels. Of the two systems, I think the vertebro-basilar circulation is the more complicated of the two. I think the anterior is a little bit easier. This has a lot of parts to it overall. Questions? If you can't read my handwriting, just ask. I'd be happy to spell anything you need. Or try to spell it anyway. So everybody good? So vertebral artery, so which artery did the vertebral artery branch off of? Subclavian, yeah, left and right subclavian gives rise to the left and right vertebral. Left and right vertebral go toward the brain and they come together about the level of frontomedullary junction to form the basilar artery, which goes up past the level of third cranial nerve, splits into two, and goes backward to make the PCA. PCA supplies the occipital lobe of blood. Major shoots off of the vertebral arteries, two of them. You have to know ASA, spinal cord artery, anterior spinal cord artery, and then pica, left and right pica, supply cerebellum. Moving up off the basilar, pica. Moving on up off the basilar, superior cerebellar artery. And little shoots coming off the basilar or the pontine. Supply the pons with blood. Questions? Yes, Rachel.
So on the first page, you did the posterior circulation in green. Is this still posterior or is this anterior?
This is all posterior.
Okay, but it's an anterior view of the posterior circulation.
So what I tried to say, and maybe it didn't come through clearly, so if you're looking at me, you're looking at the arteries that supply the posterior cortex and the cerebellum are in the back part, but the arteries themselves rise in front of the brainstem. Does that make sense? Yeah. And it's kind of cool, like I said, when we pull the brains, and it's so cool to see these arteries, and you know the names of them, you know, or I hope you do anyway. We'll pull brains next Wednesday, but you can actually see them, and they're big, like garden hose things. For some have better than others, but and you're going to see it. So the cerebellum's in the back, and the occipital lobe's in the back. But you see the arteries arise in the front part of the brainstem. Good question. Any other questions? I like to have it make sense because we're going to look at this from a few views. So everybody clear? All right, let's move on to the anterior circulation. Like I said, the vertebral-basilar circulation is the more complicated of the two. So, somebody say thank goodness. Okay. So here's anterior circulation. Okay, somebody said this looked like SpongeBob or somebody had a SpongeBob. This is just my rendition of a side of a face. Okay, what you're looking at here is if you'd be looking at the right side of my face, right? So you're looking at me from this side over here. Okay, just a schematic drawing, thinking about. And like when I showed you the heart for the first drawing, we talked about the right and left internal carotid arteries rising up. Just to start with, I'm going to start with the right internal carotid because it'll get kind of crowded here in a minute. So what happens is the right internal carotid, and I'll label that here, rises up, and this is right internal carotid. Okay, your right internal carotid, it's a continuation, so this is the red color, so this is going to supply the anterior portion of the brain with blood. Okay, looking at that red color. The right internal carotid rises up and about the level of the eye. It makes a turn, okay? It's going to come out here, and then it's going to flop around and kind of follow over top of the corpus callosum. Okay, remember the corpus callosum is that major white matter area we're going to see later on. Okay, and this is just the right side. We're going to draw on the left side here in a minute, but just the right side. Does anybody know the name of the major artery that comes off of the internal carotid that follows the corpus callosum? Supplies the frontal lobe with blood? That's going to be your anterior cerebral artery. So remember you have the posterior cerebral? Well, this is your anterior cerebral. Anterior cerebral artery, and this is going to be your right anterior cerebral artery. And that is abbreviated ACA. Okay, yeah, they're,
What was
it's a major supplier for the frontal lobe. Yeah, and we're gonna look at its territory here in a little bit too, so good question, good thinking. Any other questions? So that's gonna be the main one, so the internal carotid, so coming off the heart, you got your common carotid, and then splits into internal carotid travels all the way up about the level of your eye, makes its first major shoot, just flips up and flips all the way around, follows the corpus callosum, and that's your right anterior cerebral artery. There's only one more to worry about on the right side. And if you're looking at this, so what I'll try and do, this is an artery that's going to come right out toward me here. Okay, so the anterior cerebral artery comes up and goes around, and then there's another artery that comes off the internal carotid, and it comes out. As you'll see eventually, it's going to come right through the fissure, right through the lateral fissure on the side of the brain. So it's coming out. So if you had to think about it, it's coming from, think about it coming toward my ear. Let's try to do it three-dimensionally. Anybody know the name of this one? So we have an anterior, posterior cerebral artery. What's the other one? Huh? Middle. Yeah, this is your middle cerebral artery. So this is going to be your MCA. And that's going to be your right MCA. MCA stands for middle cerebral artery. So it's going to, you see it hook right through the lateral fissure. And the lateral fissure is that fissure that separates the temporal lobe from the parietal and frontal. So it's the thumb of the boxing glove. Any other questions? That makes sense. So that's pretty much it for anterior circulation. Just looking at one side though. Okay, internal carotid travels all the way up the level of the eye, splits off and forms anterior cerebral artery, follows corpus callosum. And then you're going to have, at about the level of the eye, you're going to have an artery that splits off internal carotid coming out toward your ear, or toward the outside of your brain, or the exterior surface of your brain. And that's going to be your middle cerebral artery. All right, yes? MCA supplies a lot. We're going to see that in a minute. Yep, MCA, you're going to have, it's going to supply the majority of the lateral surface of your brain. But we'll look at the territories here in a minute. But you're kind of putting it all together. That's kind of where we need to go. Okay, now, here's your right side. Now, what I'm going to try and do as best I can, I know I'm trying to keep it as close to red as possible. I'm just going to switch over to, the best I have right now is purple. So I'm going to try and draw the left side of the system on the same page. Okay, so coming up here, oh, I guess I could do it. Let's try it in red. I'll keep it red. So just label it differently. So coming all the way up, you have your left internal carotid. Okay, so just the same as the right internal carotid. They're coming up parallel to each other. So this is your left internal carotid. Okay. And at about the level of the eye, what's going to happen is it's going to flip over on the left side of the brain, follow the opposite side of the corpus callosum all the way around. Okay. And it's going to make another shoot going out toward the opposite ear, now out toward the left ear. So I'll make that like a dashed there. Okay. Now this is looking at the left side, and these are just running parallel up sides of the brain. Okay. So coming off at about the level of the eye and going up around the corpus callosum. Where's that one? What is this artery? Yeah, that's going to be your left ACA. Okay, because that's the left side. So the same thing. So two arteries just running out parallel and then go all the way back. Okay, and then this one, that means that this one right here is going to be your left MCA. Middle cerebral artery. So middle cerebral arteries, right and left, are just going to come up and then they're headed out toward your ear or toward the outside of the brain surface. Is Everybody see that? Pretty simple, straightforward. Okay, now let's see if we can put things together. Let's add in the posterior circulatory system here and see what happens. So, so here we have the right vertebral, that doesn't really matter. So we have right and left vertebral arteries coming up here in the back. About the level of the pontomedullary junction, they meet to form one main artery. What's the name of that artery again? Basilar. Here's your basilar artery coming up. And about the level of the third cranial nerve, the basilar artery splits off and supplies the back, the occipital lobe with blood with two major chutes going back like that. Okay, so let's do a little label. This is going to be my left vertebral. This is going to be my right vertebral. All right, this is going to be my basilar. Okay. Which makes that, let's go ahead and make this. So I tried to, it's kind of backward, but that makes this the left PCA, and this is going to be your right PCA, just supplying the occipital lobes. Just trying to make it three-dimensional a little bit. Okay, so I did nothing more than just put the posterior circulatory system that's going to be important for the next part in here with the anterior circulatory system. Now we need to talk about how they connect. Does anybody know how they connect? So what happens is there's something really important that connects the left and right halves of the anterior circulatory system, but it also connects the anterior circulatory system with the posterior circulatory system. Has anyone ever heard of the circle of Willis? All right, here's the circle of Willis. So what's going to happen is the ACA has a small connection up front. And this, again, this is something that we'll see when we pull the branch. You'll see the right and left ACAs coming back, and then there's an artery that connects the two of them. Okay? The job of this artery is to allow blood to flow from the left and right halves of the brain. Okay? In case there's a blockage somewhere, it's kind of like a overflow system. And this is called the anterior communicating artery. So it's connecting the anterior cerebral arteries. It's called the anterior communicating artery. There's just one of these. And its sole purpose in life is to connect the right and left ACA and help supply blood to both, or keep the blood flow going for both the right and left halves of the brain. So essentially connects the anterior circulatory system right and left sides. It's a teeny tiny little artery. Yeah, we'll get to circle of Willis in a minute. Circle of Willis, yeah, circle of Willis. We'll talk about that in a minute. So I'm just trying to draw the circle of Willis now from this view, just from the side, what you're seeing. The other thing that is part of the circle of Willis is there's an artery that comes off the internal carotid and goes back and connects to the right PCA. And then there's two of these, they're both the same, there's just one on the left and one on the right. There's another artery that comes off the left internal carotid and goes back and connects to the left PCA. Any guesses as to what that one's called? Yeah, that's the posterior communicating artery, and there are two of them. So there's going to be a right posterior communicating artery, right posterior communicating artery, and a left posterior communicating okay, right, left posterior communicating arteries. And the job of these small little arteries is to allow blood flow between the anterior and posterior circulatory systems of the brain. Okay, and from this view, I think it's harder to see from this view, but I'll try and show it anyway. If you can imagine this being three-dimensional and like flipped here, so you have a circle. This circle right in here with the anterior communicating and part of the ACA, internal carotid, all the way back to the PCA and back over connection. That's the circle of Willis. So I like that up here. It's called the circle of Willis. We're going to look at the circle of Willis. I think it's hard to see this way, but then when I started looking at it from above, I think it's more clear. So we'll look at it from above here in a minute. Did you have a question, Derek?
What is the posterior communicating artery connect?
Posterior communicating artery connects the anterior circulatory system, so the stuff in red, to the stuff in green, the posterior circulatory system. So it connects specifically, the right internal is connected to the right PCA via the right posterior communicating, and the left internal carotid is connected to the left PCA by the left posterior communicating artery to form one big circle. Yes?
Within the circle of Willis, what direction is it from?
All directions, yeah, within the circle of Willis, you're just getting, so think about, I guess the best way to say it, I don't know if the word makes sense, is cerebral perfusion. So there's blood everywhere. It's a flood of blood that in case there's an issue on one half of the brain, then it won't be, everything on that side won't be lost. Only the area that doesn't get any blood will be lost on that side because it's a push through. Okay. Other questions? Okay, let's take a break and regroup and look at it from above.